Dr. Kathomi Gatwiri. I am a senior academic and a psychotherapist and the founder of Healing Together Psychotherapy.
Everyone, my name is Reem Elnour. My pronouns are she and her. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney, focused on colorectal cancer research.
Hey Bobby, let the bass go.
Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse where a person or a group makes someone or members of another group question their perception of reality or memories. So these experiences leave people feeling, confused, anxious, unable to trust themselves, or feeling like they're crazy or overreacting. So the term gaslighting actually is a pop culture reference which comes from a movie called Gaslight, where a husband manipulates his wife into thinking that she has a mental illness by dimming their gas-fueled lights and telling her that she's imagining it. And she starts to think that she's actually hallucinating and that she's crazy. Racial gaslighting is when Black, Indigenous, or other people of color who experience institutional or interpersonal racism are told that their experiences are not true, that it's in their heads, that they're making a fuss of something that is not a big deal. So this is when racial experiences are denied or explained away by others. So it's a form of emotional abuse, and it's actually an insidious tool that is used to manipulate people into doubting their own racial experiences in order for whiteness or white supremacy to maintain its power and control. So the way that I think about racial gaslighting is almost to think of it as a tool of white supremacy that functions to maintain a way of racial hierarchy that defaults to whiteness as an ideal. So the more Black, Indigenous, and people of color resist this default standard of whiteness as the norm, the more they are faced with resistance, with backlash, with denial, and with more violence, because whiteness as the standard is trying to protect itself and retain its power in that racial hierarchy platform. I don't think there's a huge difference between racial gaslighting and microaggressions because I think they're born from the same platform. They are both tools of white supremacy, and they function to play the same role, which is to minimize and to communicate a pattern of put-downs and disrespect towards racially minoritized people. So, racial gaslighting might look like microaggressions. It might look like micro-invalidations. It might look like micro-insults. It might look like micro-assaults. It might look like micro-suspicions. And it might also look like micro, burdens of the things that Black people have to wear and to carry just by existing with a Black body. So I think these two are, two sides of the same coin, but really they have the same parent, and the same parent is white supremacy. They just function to minoritize, and they function to invalidate and to communicate very subtle but hostile racial slights. So I don't know how I can separate them rather than see them basically as twins in this conversation.
I experience racial gaslighting almost every day. To start off, I am the only Black person, Black woman specifically, in my research institute. So I already stick out like a sore thumb. Anytime I'll rock up with a new hairstyle or looking a little bit, colorful or what have you. I get comments here and there about it. The people in my professional field always try to dismiss the way I feel, and I don't think they realize it. It's just that, they're not Black. They don't understand my struggles. So if I want to talk to a colleague about some sort of microaggression or an instance where I've been gaslit, they don't understand and they dismiss it. And that in itself is gaslighting me, making me question whether or not I am justified in feeling the way that I feel. And it's not just in, my professional field, where I have an extensive body of work to support who I am and why I deserve to be there, but I also am assigned model. And that's where I really experience a lot of racial gaslighting. People expect models to be timid and quiet, but the second I speak up and, call out what's wrong, I'm seen as loud and aggressive and ungrateful when I'm just asking for the bare minimum. So to save myself from situations like this, it depends on what the situation is. If I'm at work, I'm around academics and people who have, degrees and doctorates and what have you, I have to bite my tongue. It really sucks that I have to bite my tongue, but I have no choice because, like I previously said, people look at Black women in a certain kind of way. If I'm calling out racial gaslighting or any form of discrimination, I'm the one who's problematic. So when I'm in the lab and something's bothering me and I want to talk about it, I just can't. It's a shame because I don't find friends in that industry. All of my friends come from outside, in creative environments because they are like me, they look like me, they have similar struggles. And that's not to say that there aren't Black people or people of color in the medical industry, it's just that I don't get to interact with them. So I have to bite my tongue when it comes to that. In social settings, it's different. I'm the first to pop off because I know that there's nothing really at stake there. And the fact that I can't really speak out in my work environment is upsetting. If I'm out at an event or a party with people and there is something that isn't sitting right with me, I'm the first to speak up about it. And I'm almost disappointed in myself for not allowing myself to be vocal and to stand up against any racial discrimination or gaslighting at work. But I can't afford to, and most Black people can't afford to do so either.
Often you can tell you're being gaslit if you leave an exchange or an interaction feeling completely unheard, confused, angry, disrespected, but really not being able to still put a finger on it. You just leave there feeling completely dissented, not really knowing whether you're imagining it or whether it's in your head. So talking to a trusted person with an outside perspective on the situation will help to validate that you're not imagining things. It might also help if you can create an external or record these interactions so that as soon as they happen, so that you know that you're not imagining them. But having said that, I don't think you can stop being gaslit in a collective context where racism is the bedrock that unconsciously informs so many organizational, institutional, and the ordering of things. What I think is a better question to ask, in my opinion, is how can you retain your racial dignity in the face of constant denial that your experiences, your racial experiences are true? So that's the question to think about, is how do you retain your racial dignity in the face of so much denial and so much minimization of your experience? So I guess what I want to say here, and particularly speaking to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, is to know that it's not necessarily their responsibility to stop gaslighting from happening. It's not really problem that you created, and it's not really your responsibility to stop it per se. In fact, feeling like it's your responsibility to stop this creates an unnecessary racial burden, racial fatigue, of having to think constantly about how you navigate these dynamics. It's almost like you have to learn the skills of putting out a fire that you didn't ignite. Instead, what I want you to think about this is depersonalize it and think about it more contextually, which is Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color are more likely to experience this as a reality of their lives. And due to the structuring of whiteness as the default, the standard way of being, there is an assumption, an unspoken assumption, that Black people are overly emotional, sensitive, irrational about race, or make everything about race, when actually Black people didn't create the structures of racial hierarchy that harm them. So when the people who benefit from this hierarchy turn around and say, it's the people who didn't create this hierarchy that are overreacting, I want you to see that for what it is, that you're being gaslighted. And these assumptions that Black people and people of color are sensitive about race provides an excuse to dismiss their feelings and experiences of racism. So I don't think it's your responsibility to stop it, but I think it's your responsibility to maintain your racial dignity in the face of it.
Oh, Black people and people of color can absolutely gaslight each other. Have you heard of Candace Owens? That woman is something different, but yes, Black people and people of color can gaslight each other. It's funny because I see gaslighting. I experience gaslighting more with people of color rather than Black people, because there's a very, very big difference between being Black and being a person of color. Society has been structured in a way where people of color can benefit from whiteness, or are they're closer in proximity to being white. So when I try to explain to a person of color that something has made me feel uncomfortable, the more often than not, the response that I get is, well, are you sure? Well, did you say something that could have maybe resulted in this? So yeah, it's very much possible. And I can get that from Black people as well. And it comes from this fear of trying to fit in. Black people and people of color have to pipe down and make themselves feel small and mold themselves to make white people feel comfortable. That's where you can see racial gaslighting. Yeah. So sometimes, Black people or people of color can ask you, well, are you sure it was about race? Are you sure that you're feeling this way because you're Black and it's not because of something else that you did? No, it's most definitely because I'm Black.
Yes. And it's the same, can women have misogynist views? Can women perpetrate the ideals of patriarchy? Yes. Can women have views that are destructive to other women? Yes. And it's the same when it comes to racism as well. When you live in a society that constantly tells you you're less than, when it constantly views and locates Black people as dangerous, as unattractive, as something to be aware of, as a problem that needs to be fixed. If you're a Black person and you're looking at these images and these narratives over and over and over again, just imagine the sense of impact that it might have on your own sense of worth and racial dignity. So I believe that when Black people and people of color gaslighted us, they're just, parroting, and they're just perpetuating the same tools of white supremacy that they've learned to adopt and to internalize. So everybody is affected by this ocean that we are swimming in, and Black people and people of color are not insulated or isolated from it. They can be victims of it just as much as they can be perpetrators of this. So,
well, for starters, I'm always going to trust my gut when I'm being gaslit. I'm not going to be apologetic for that or for speaking up about it, and no one should either. And if me speaking up or anyone else speaking up makes other people feel uncomfortable, then that's not my problem. If you do something wrong and you cross the line, you need to know. And I shouldn't be the only one having to tell you. Everyone else should call you out for your behavior.
Look, I think that's the purpose of gaslighting, is to make you question your experience, is to make you think you're overreacting and oversensitive and question your judgment. When you start to feel like you're double guessing your experience, you just know, yep, that experience has produced exactly the same result that it was hoping to have. So to answer this, I want to quote an incredible woman, Jacqueline Iyama, who wrote a viral Instagram post on this topic. And she advises Black, Indigenous, and people of color to follow these 3 key things, which I'll also share with you today. 1 is, don't let anyone tell you how to feel about something that they've never had the experience of in their body. Your lived experience is your expertise. So don't let anybody explain away your experience when you know it to be true. Number 2, don't exhaust yourself arguing with someone who is more concerned about not being called a racist rather than doing the work of being anti-racist. If they're more concerned about their feelings of goodness and they're, centering themselves as being good people rather than looking inward and looking at how their intentions might have caused unintended consequences, then it's not really, don't exhaust yourself, centering those feelings. Instead, go inside and look at your own experience. And again, stay grounded on your own racial dignity. Number 3, don't spend time trying to prove why something is racist. A lot of people are just so overcommitted to misunderstanding you. It is not your job to be an unpaid anti-racist educator, okay? Your experience is your expertise. Divest from having to be every person's educator about your experience. And the 4th thing that I would like to add to this is, don't re-traumatize yourself by having to recount your own traumatic experience of racism so that people can believe you. All right? Not everybody has earned the right to hear your story. Another form of protecting your racial dignity is to know who and why to share your story. And if it's not safe, if you feel you're not going to be believed, just go to communities and places where you know your experience is going to be affirmed and validated. Of course, that's why we are talking about these conversations, because the impact is manifold. The impact is long-term and damaging. The processes of racialization, which produce microaggressions and racial gaslighting, have significant impacts on people's psychological safety. So Black people and people of color just do not enjoy the protection of living in a social environment that cushions them from the stresses and the micro injuries of racialization. The burden of not being believed, tiptoeing around your experiences so you don't upset others, sitting with an experience, by yourself because you know that other people are just not going to get it, catering to white feelings so that you're not accused of being an aggressor is really difficult. It is difficult when your most important lived experience is not believed. And this is what culminates in what William Smith refers to as racial battle fatigue. Racial battle fatigue makes visible the burden of wearing a body that is constantly assaulted by racism. And it highlights the profound psychological and physiological and emotional burden of living in a body that is constantly assaulted by these experiences. So this battle, of course, has significant health outcomes for Black people, and some of these outcomes include chronic diseases, dying young, indigestion and gastric distress, apathy, irritability, a profound sense of helplessness, powerlessness and hopelessness, mood dysregulation, issues such as rage and anger, intergenerational trauma that lead to all these things such as substance abuse and a sense of chronic powerlessness, poor school or job performance. All these things culminates when you're living in an environment that is not safe, and this is what I say, that racial battle fatigue has not only immediate impacts, but long-term impacts that can lead to intergenerational trauma to people who are not, to our children who are not even here yet. So the impact of racial gaslighting, of course, has severe mental health implications. Some of these implications in the here and now can look like just feeling isolated, feeling disenfranchised, feeling disconnected from people, your community. It might also lead to internalized racism, which is, just that sense of starting to believe the narrative. If you're constantly misbelieved, if you're constantly misunderstood, if you're constantly told you are the problem, maybe you might start believing that, wow, maybe I'm the issue, maybe I am the problem. And of course, this has such significant impact on Black people's sense of worth, sense of self-esteem, sense of confidence, which generates a lot of sadness and fear and guilt and anger, coming to that sense of, maybe it's my fault, maybe I caused this, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I'm overreacting, leads to a sense of internalization, which then, leads to a lot of self-destructive impacts on your sense of racial dignity.
So I would kill racial gaslighting by building a damn time machine, going back a couple hundred years, stopping white people from colonizing Black and brown people and their lands, give them something better to do, give them a Rubik's Cube or something, and then come back.
The brain. Hey Bobby, let the bass go.
Educating everyone, whether you're white, Black, a person of color, on what racial gaslighting is and how you can partake in racial gaslighting without even knowing it. Educating people on the history of racism, period, because people just don't know. They might understand racism, but they don't know where it stems from. And education is the key to solving so many of these issues.
How would I kill racial gaslighting? One, I would say, don't be defensive. Listen to what other people are telling you, showing you. Don't aim to be I'm not a racist, aim to be anti-racist. You know, not being racist is not enough. You know, how can we be in a world where everybody claims not to be racist, yet we are filled with experiences of people dying, you know, because of racism. And almost every person of color has a situation and an experience where they have been a victim. So I don't get that dichotomy and that paradox. Number two, you know, just realize that your intentions have consequences and own that. Just because you didn't intend to hurt someone doesn't mean that they were not hurt. Number three, I would say two things can be true at the same time. You can be a good person and you can still perpetuate stereotypes that harm Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The intention is to learn, not to sink in shame or guilt. The other thing that I would say is don't rely on Black people or people of color to teach you about racism. That's a burden that shouldn't be carried by anybody who has to live through these experiences. It's also a form of white centering. The other point is accountability feels like an attack when you're not ready to acknowledge how your behavior harms others. So if you're told that you've done something and you find yourself feeling really defensive and it feels like an attack, just sit down and ask, why am I feeling this way and why am I reacting this way? The other thing that I would like to say is people gaslight others when they have their own realities denied by others. So don't discharge your pain by gaslighting others. Address it. Maybe go to therapy. And finally, I would say the inner voice that says that you're better than others is just as disempowering as the inner voice that says that you're lesser than others. The goal is Ubuntu. I am because you are. And because you are, we are. We humanize ourselves by humanizing others. And that's the essence of being human.
Let the bass go.
Call me an eater, call me a nominal. Long face.
Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Obsolete. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. 8-1. And Zarkov. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love. Kiss all my love.
Deep, deep, deep.
This is a pen push.